100 degrees in Miami on August 18th. The second time in 84 years that city has touched that temperature. The first occurrence was July 21st, 1942, before air conditioning was standard, before the metro area held half its current population, before almost anyone alive today was born. And here is what makes this different from a single remarkable data point. The atmospheric system responsible for it is not retreating. It is not moving east into the Atlantic and dissipating the way heat domes normally behave in late summer. It is expanding. It is strengthening. And this morning, the Weather Prediction Center and the Climate Prediction Center are in alignment on something every person living in the south, the southern plains, the southwest, and the Intermountain West needs to understand before making any decisions about their week. The ridge is locked. The upper-level high-pressure system anchored over the Four Corners region, where 500 millibar heights are running at the 97th percentile of climatology, according to the National Weather Service in Phoenix, pressing against 595 to 597 decameters, is forecast to expand northward into the Intermountain West and eastward toward the high plains through the next 10 days. The Climate Prediction Center has posted a moderate risk of extreme heat, valid through August 29th, for the central and southern plains and the lower Mississippi and Tennessee valleys. And in their extended hazards discussion for August 26th through September 1st, they flagged something that reframes this entire event. Their exact language: dynamical models remain in good agreement with an amplified subtropical ridge center retrograding from the southern plains into the eastern Four Corners, where models maintain signal for 500 millibar heights exceeding 597 decameters throughout much of the period. Bookended by mean troughs over the eastern Pacific and the eastern United States, the pattern implies an omega block with little respite to the predominant ridging for much of central North America through late August and possibly into early September. That is the operational guidance from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center this week. I'm going to break this down completely today. Immediate conditions across the country, the 7-day forecast by specific dates, the mechanism driving this extraordinary ridge, the drought feedback that is actively reinforcing it, and the El Niño signal in the tropical Pacific that connects what is happening this week to what September and October are likely to look like. Stay with me. There is a lot here, and all of it matters. My name is Arthur, and this is US Weather Threat. If you are not subscribed, hit that button below. The next 7 days of forecast updates are going to be critical for anyone in the southern tier, and you do not want to miss a single one. Let's get into the data. Start with what the data is showing today, August 20th, in the immediate and short range. The heat dome is attacking two corridors simultaneously. To the southeast, it has already delivered the most historically significant heat readings of this summer. Miami tied its all-time temperature record at 100 degrees Fahrenheit on August 18th. That city's official temperature record dates back to 1895, 131 years of continuous climatological observation. 100 degrees. Twice in that entire record. The previous occurrence was 84 years ago. Fort Lauderdale reached 98 degrees on the same day, tying its daily temperature record for August 18th. The NWS Miami office documented heat index values of 105 to 112 degrees across South Florida through the afternoon. This morning, forecasters noted that even with some possible afternoon storm development limiting temperature peaks, heat index values could still reach 105 to 110 degrees before those storms develop. The storm coverage is incomplete, the timing is uncertain, and the moisture underneath this ridge is simply too deep and the atmospheric stability too entrenched for a few pop-up storms to break the pattern. Now look northwest along the same ridge. Oklahoma has produced the most extreme temperature numbers of this current heat event in pure terms. Kingfisher, Oklahoma, hit 112 degrees on August 18th, a record high for that specific date at that location. Northwest South Tulsa carries an extreme heat warning through this evening, valid for northeast and east-central Oklahoma, with heat index values of 110 to 115 degrees. Wichita and Topeka are in extended heat warnings running through Saturday evening. Kansas City's heat warning extends through Saturday. The NWS has 13 extreme heat warnings and 41 heat advisories in effect across the lower 48 as of this morning, spanning from Kansas and Oklahoma through the Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida coasts. Charleston, South Carolina is forecast to reach 100 degrees today, with a feels-like temperature of 112 degrees. That would break records. Earlier this month, the NWS Charleston office warned of heat indices potentially reaching 115 degrees along the coast during the August 13th and 14th event. South Carolina in general has been experiencing some of the longest consecutive day heat stress on record this summer, and Charleston is right at the core of today's southeast extension of the ridge. Here is who needs to watch this the most right now, and I want to be specific. The areas sitting directly underneath the ridge core are at the highest risk today and tomorrow. Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Wichita, Kansas City, Little Rock, Jackson, Shreveport, Houston, and the entire coastal corridor from Charleston through Savannah and down into South Florida. These are not cities that are on the periphery of this event, they are in the center of it. And the overnight low temperatures in all of these areas are what I am most focused on right now. Across the South Central corridor, morning low temperatures are holding in the mid to upper 70s, not the upper 60s where they belong this time of year, the mid to upper 70s. Jeff Masters of Yale Climate Connections made the point directly about heat waves like this one. If it does not cool off at night, the body does not have time to readjust. 3 consecutive nights of lows in the mid-70s is uncomfortable. 5 consecutive nights is a cumulative physiological stress event. 7 or more nights at those temperatures is where heat-related illness and mortality rates start to climb significantly, even among people who are managing the daytime temperatures reasonably well. Tell me in the comments right now, what did your overnight low thermometer read this morning? Not your afternoon high, the overnight low. I want to know where you are, what the number was, and how many consecutive nights you have been above your normal morning low. That ground-level observation tells me things the models cannot. Now let me go day by day through the next 7 days with as much specificity as the current model guidance allows. August 20th and 21st, today through Thursday. The WPC short-range forecast discussion, valid through Friday, August 21st, describes the pattern in exactly 2 ways that matter. Dangerous heat persists in the south and southeast, and simultaneously, heat is building into the southwest. 2 simultaneous expansion zones on the same ridge. The ridge is not just holding, it is growing into new territory. Highs in the upper 90s to low 100s across Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana, and coastal South Carolina. Heat indices 105 to 115 degrees across Oklahoma, Kansas, eastern Texas, and the southeast coast. North Douglas Phoenix with 500 millibar heights at the 97th percentile of climatology. Phoenix and Las Vegas are heading into a phase that is extraordinary even by desert Southwest standards. Daytime highs in Phoenix forecast in the 112 to 115 degree range through Thursday before any marginal moderation. August 22nd and 23rd, Saturday and Sunday. The CPC hazards discussion is the key document for this period. It carries a high risk of extreme heat, valid through August 28th for the southern plains, now expanded to include additional portions of New Mexico and southern Arizona. Calibrated heat tools within that high-risk zone are showing greater than 60% probability of daytime temperatures and heat index values exceeding the 90th percentile. Greater than 60% confidence of being in the top 10% of historical readings for this exact time of year. Daytime temperatures above 100 degrees, heat indices above 110 where sufficient moisture is present. And Houston deserves particular attention this weekend. The Houston Chronicle reported this past week that a ridge shift northward and strengthening over southeast Texas this weekend could rank the incoming heat dome among the strongest 1% ever observed over that region at this time of year. One metric frequently used to evaluate heat dome intensity is the 500 millibar height anomaly. When that anomaly approaches the 99th percentile, you are in historically rare atmospheric compression territory. Southeast Texas may reach or approach that threshold this weekend. August 24th and 25th, Monday and Tuesday. The WPC extended discussion describes continued widespread heat and hazardous heat from the southwest to the plains and lower Mississippi Valley. The southeast begins to see some easing in relative terms, but the language is specific. Easing in the southeast, not removal. The heat core remains locked in the south-central corridor through this period. Oklahoma, Kansas, Arkansas, Louisiana, eastern Texas. These states are looking at afternoon heat indices continuing well above 100 degrees, with morning lows still not recovering to where they should be. August 26th through 29th. This is the period that changed the forecast complexity significantly when the models updated this week. Both the GFS and the European ensemble are now supporting the Omega block pattern flagged by the CPC. The CPC hazards discussion is unambiguous. Models maintain signal for 500 millibar heights exceeding 597 decameters throughout the period, with little respite to the predominant ridging from much of central North America through late August and possibly into early September. Within the highlighted high-risk area, greater than 60% chances for daytime temperatures and heat index values exceeding the 90th percentile remain valid through August 28th. An Omega block is not just a heat dome that persists. It is a heat dome that has structural reinforcement. The name comes from the pattern's resemblance to the Greek capital letter omega when you map the 500 millibar height contours, a rounded ridge flanked by troughs on both sides. Those flanking troughs are not accidental. They are part of the same teleconnection pattern. They act as walls that hold the ridge in place and prevent the clean, cold front passages that would normally erode a late summer heat dome. Some of the most sustained and historically deadly heat events in United States weather history have been Omega block events. They resist the normal atmospheric progression because the atmospheric circulation is essentially locked into a self-reinforcing configuration. Now I need to step back from the day-by-day and explain the larger mechanism that is making all of this possible. Because this summer has not been a series of random hot periods, there is a specific physical driver behind it: El Niño. The Climate Prediction Center issued an El Niño advisory this week. The ENSO diagnostic discussion carries explicit language. El Niño is strengthening, with a greater than 90% chance of a very strong event during the Northern Hemisphere fall and winter 2026 into 2027. The Nino 3.4 index is running above +1, approaching moderate El Niño status. The CPC also put a 69% probability on this becoming a historically unprecedented event, exceeding +2.5 degrees Celsius on the 3-month running Nino index, stronger than any El Niño event since 1950. They are calling this a potential super El Niño in terms of raw magnitude. What does that mean for the atmospheric pattern that is currently cooking the southern United States? El Niño enhances the subtropical jet stream. It injects additional energy and forcing into the atmospheric circulation of the southern tier of the country. During the developing phase of El Niño, the phase we are in right now, that enhanced subtropical jet tends to support amplified high-pressure ridges over the central and southern United States during late summer. The positive Pacific meridional mode associated with strengthening El Niño warms eastern tropical Pacific sea surface temperatures and increases moisture loading in the subtropical atmosphere, which feeds additional energy into any ridge already in place. El Niño does not create heat domes by itself, but it creates conditions in which heat domes form more readily, persist longer, and are harder to break. This is the mechanism behind the summer of 2026. 3 distinct heat dome events since late June, each one supported by a developing El Niño that has been strengthening throughout the season. Event 1, June 28th through July 5th. The ridge anchored over the eastern United States. Peak temperature, 106 degrees Fahrenheit in Atlantic City, New Jersey, on the 4th of July, the 250th anniversary of American independence. The hottest Independence Day reading in that city in over a decade. Washington, D.C. came within a few degrees of its all-time record high of 106 degrees. New York City had a shot at consecutive 100-degree days for the first time since 2011. Event 2, July 6th onward. The ridge built over the western and central states. More than 130 million Americans under extreme heat alerts. Hundreds of daily temperature records shattered. Some western locations ran 20 to 40 degrees above normal for the time of year, a statistical departure that climate scientists described as nearly impossible without the background warming trend of a human-altered climate system. Daily records fell in Nunavut in the Canadian Arctic on July 4th. The heat was not contained to the lower 48. It pushed into Canada, into the Arctic, into regions that had no historical baseline for temperatures like those. Event 3, the current event. The Washington Post on August 14th called it the strongest heat dome on the planet this weekend, centered in the South. Miami broke 84 years of temperature history 2 days after that article published. Kingfisher, Oklahoma, hit 112 degrees. The CPC is now flagging omega block structure through late August and into September. This is the third and potentially longest-lasting event of a summer that has already broken the all-time record for hottest month ever recorded in the contiguous United States. July 2026 averaged 76.89 degrees Fahrenheit across the lower 48, eclipsing the Dust Bowl's July 1936 by 1/8 of a degree, records going back to 1895. The Dust Bowl is the comparison point. We cleared it. Have you been living through this summer in the South or the Plains? Tell me in the comments how many total days your area has been above its normal high temperature since June. Not just the extreme days, the total count. I'm trying to build a cumulative heat stress picture across the country, and your local observation is data I cannot pull from the models. Now I want to go somewhere most of the weather coverage is not going. The drought feedback that is actively reinforcing this ridge from below. The CPC hazards outlook for late August flagged rapid onset drought across the south-central United States. This is a specific meteorological designation, not the gradual multi-month drought most people picture when they hear the word. Rapid onset drought develops over days to weeks when extreme heat combines with suppressed precipitation. Oklahoma, eastern Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, parts of Mississippi. Soil moisture across this corridor is trending toward the 95th percentile anomaly in dryness for this time of year. The driest 5% of the historical record. Here is why the drought matters for the heat dome itself, not just for agriculture. When soil moisture is abundant, incoming solar radiation is largely consumed by the evaporation process. The conversion of liquid water to water vapor absorbs enormous amounts of energy and keeps surface temperatures lower. When soils are dry, that same incoming solar radiation is not absorbed by evaporation. Instead, it is radiated back into the lower atmosphere as sensible heat, the kind of heat you feel, the kind that warms the air column directly above the surface, the kind that strengthens and reinforces the high-pressure ridge overhead. Dry soils are essentially amplifiers for heat domes. They feed energy back into the very atmospheric pattern that is preventing the rainfall that would restore soil moisture. This is why late summer heat dome events over drought-stricken areas are so resistant to breaking once they establish. The land surface is actively working to maintain the atmospheric pattern that is desiccating it. It is a feedback loop with no natural off switch, except a strong enough atmospheric disturbance to crack the ridge from above, and the omega block pattern means those disturbances are blocked from reaching the region for at least the next 10 days. USGS stream gauge data across the lower Mississippi and Missouri river systems is already showing discharge values falling below median for this time of year at multiple stations in Oklahoma and Arkansas. Agricultural water demand is running at or near peak levels for late summer crops, while river and reservoir supply is declining. Cotton across the Texas South Plains, sorghum across Oklahoma, late-season corn across Arkansas and Missouri. All of these crops are under compounding heat and drought stress in precisely the window when they are most vulnerable. The CPC's current El Niño outlook adds one more signal that I think changes the long-term read on this summer significantly. El Niño at greater than 90% probability of a very strong event by fall and winter means the atmospheric background forcing is not going to diminish. It is going to accelerate. As the Ninyo 3.4 index climbs further into positive territory through September and October, the downstream atmospheric responses across North America will continue. Historical analog years for developing super El Niño events, 1982 into 1983, 1997 into 1998, showed the southern tier of the United States experiencing prolonged, above-normal temperatures through the fall months, even after the summer's most intense heat events faded. The question for 2026 is whether the Omega block breaks before the atmosphere fully transitions into the El Niño fall regime, or whether the two phases overlap, creating an extended period of above-normal temperatures in the south that runs from late August directly into October, without a genuine recovery window in between. Based on current model guidance, that overlap scenario is now more probable than the alternative. The GFS and the European ensemble are aligned on the Omega block through August 28th to September 1st. The CPC has flagged it in their operational product, and the El Niño background forcing is strengthening as we speak. 70 confirmed heat-related deaths in the United States attributed to this summer's events through early August. Cook County, Illinois confirmed 12 of those, more than in any year of the past decade, all but one during July. Heat does not generate dramatic visuals. It does not have a funnel cloud or a wall of water. It operates inside the body, over consecutive days of overnight lows that do not recover and afternoon highs that do not relent, until thermoregulation fails. That is precisely why the overnight low temperature number is more important than the afternoon peak in a prolonged event like this one. The body can handle a single hot afternoon. It cannot handle a 7th consecutive night of lows in the mid-70s. Now let me close with where I stand on the extended outlook and what I am going to be watching most closely in the models over the coming days. Through August 28th, the South Central Plains, Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and the Desert Southwest are in the highest confidence extreme heat zone. Heat indices above 110 degrees on multiple consecutive days. Morning lows not recovering into the upper 60s. Rapid onset drought conditions deepening and reinforcing the ridge from the surface. Through the end of August and into early September, the Omega block pattern now showing in both the GFS and the European ensemble will resist the clean cold front passages that would normally break a heat dome at this stage of the season. The southeast may see some marginal easing late this week per the WPC, but the South Central corridor is not getting a decisive pattern break before September in the current guidance. The single variable I am most focused on is the behaviour of the upper-level trough over the eastern Pacific. If that trough deepens significantly and begins to push the ridge eastward, rather than reinforcing it from the west, that would be the first signal that the Omega block is losing structural integrity, and that a more significant atmospheric disturbance could eventually reach the south-central United States and break the heat. Right now, the models are not showing that. They are showing the western trough holding in place and performing exactly the blocking function that maintains an Omega configuration. Tomorrow morning, the first priority is the fresh GFS and European runs. I will be pulling those immediately. The specific number I am watching is the 500 millibar height value over the four corners at the 48, 72, and 96-hour lead times. Any downward trend in that number, any erosion from 597 decameters toward 590 or below, would be the first atmospheric signal that the ridge is beginning to weaken. I will have that update for you as soon as those runs process. Stay safe out there, keep the cooling on, check on anyone around you without reliable access to air conditioning. Heat is the #1 weather killer in the United States in most years. This summer, that statistic is not abstract. It is 70 confirmed deaths and counting. Like this video if this level of analysis is what you want. Subscribe to US Weather Threat if you are not already, and drop your city and your overnight low from this morning in the comments. I will read every one. And I want to add one more layer to this analysis before we close, because I think it is the piece that actually explains why this summer feels different to people who have lived in the South and the Plains for decades. It is not just that the temperatures are higher, it is the duration, it is the persistence. It is the fact that the ridge keeps coming back. Think about the sequence of this summer in terms of what the atmosphere has been doing since June. The first heat dome parked over the eastern United States at the end of June and held through the 4th of July. Before that system had even fully faded from the Midwest and the East, the second dome was already building over the western and central states. Before that second system retreated, the third, the current one, was already establishing itself in the south and southwest. 3 heat dome episodes in roughly 7 weeks. Not 3 separate isolated events, but 3 chapters in a continuous pattern that has not given the southern United States a genuine recovery period between events. That continuous pattern has an atmospheric name. Meteorologists call it a persistent blocking pattern, a configuration of the jet stream in which the large-scale flow becomes stuck in a repeating configuration that does not progress through the normal westerly flow the way weather systems usually do. Instead of the jet stream carrying storm systems and frontal boundaries through the country on a roughly weekly cycle, the flow locks up. The ridge stays. The fronts either stall out or get deflected north, and the southern tier gets cooked not for a week, but for weeks at a stretch. The driving force behind this summer's persistent blocking is the developing El Niño in the tropical Pacific. Here is the mechanism in plain terms. As sea surface temperatures warm across the eastern and central tropical Pacific, which is exactly what the Ninyo 3.4 index is measuring when it reports values above +1 this week, the atmosphere responds. Warm tropical ocean temperatures increase evaporation and convection in the tropics. That convection releases enormous amounts of latent heat into the upper atmosphere. That upper-level heating creates a wave pattern in the large-scale atmospheric circulation that propagates northward and poleward into the mid-latitudes. The specific wave pattern associated with a developing El Niño tends to favour amplified ridges over the central and western United States. Those ridges are the heat domes, and because the tropical Pacific warming that drives them is a slow-moving large-scale feature, sea surface temperatures do not change on a weekly basis the way the jet stream does. The wave pattern it generates tends to be persistent. It does not come and go in a few days. It establishes itself, and it holds. Now overlay on that the background warming of the climate system. The National Centres for Environmental Information documented that March 2026 ran at or near record levels of warmth across the contiguous United States. April and May followed the same pattern. By the time June arrived and the first heat dome formed, the land surface was already entering summer in an unusually warm and dry state. Soil moisture was below normal across large portions of the central and southern plains before the first heat dome even arrived. That pre-existing dryness primed the land surface to amplify the first dome, which deepened the soil moisture deficit, which primed the land surface to amplify the second dome, and so on. Each heat dome left the land in a worse state than it found it, making the next one slightly more intense and slightly more persistent. This compounding sequence is exactly what the drought science literature describes when it discusses the relationship between persistent heat events and land surface feedbacks. It is not a new mechanism, but in summers where the tropical Pacific is simultaneously pumping an El Niño-driven blocking pattern into the atmosphere, it can produce sequences of events that look historically unusual even by modern standards. July 2026 averaged 76.89 degrees Fahrenheit across the lower 48, breaking the Dust Bowl record from 1936. The Dust Bowl, that is the reference point. And the soil moisture feedbacks that characterize the Dust Bowl summers, dry land amplifying heat, heat deepening drought, drought amplifying subsequent heat events, are operating in the southern plains right now in the late summer of 2026. What are you seeing on the ground in your area? Have you noticed that your lawn or your local parks and fields look drier and more stressed than they normally do in mid-August? Leave that in the comments. I am tracking the agricultural and vegetation signals that accompany these soil moisture feedbacks and the observations from people on the ground across the plains and the south are invaluable for building that picture. I also want to spend a moment on what is happening at the margins of this heat dome, because not everyone is inside the core, and understanding the edge of the pattern matters for millions of people who are getting hit intermittently rather than continuously. To the north of the ridge, the WPC describes a relatively active flow with rounds of rain and thunderstorms across the northern tier. Cities in the northern plains, Fargo, North Dakota, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Minneapolis, Minnesota, are in a very different weather pattern than Oklahoma and Texas right now. The cold fronts that are being deflected north of the ridge are producing storm activity across the northern states. Those fronts are the same systems that would bring relief to the south-central United States if the Omega block were not in place to push them north. This is the frustrating geometry of a blocking pattern. The relief that the south needs is going to Canada and the northern plains instead. For the Midwest, Kansas City, St. Louis, Indianapolis, Columbus, you're in a transition zone. The northern edge of the heat dome has been affecting you intermittently throughout this summer, with heat advisory days alternating with brief cool-down periods. The current guidance shows Kansas City and St. Louis inside the heat warning zone through the weekend, with some marginal easing possible early next week as the ridge shifts slightly. But watch for that easing to be partial and short-lived if the Omega block verification holds. Omega block patterns do not release the Midwest cleanly. They tend to produce a few days of improvement, followed by a reinstatement of the ridge when the flanking troughs are unable to fully disrupt the pattern. For the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York, you had your moment of heat earlier in the summer during the June 28th through July 5th event. Right now, you are on the northern and eastern edge of the current ridge. Temperatures are running above normal for August, but not in the extreme category that the south and plains are experiencing. The WPC is showing troughing setting up in the east through the extended period, which means the northeast is likely to stay in a relatively active and stormier pattern through the end of August, rather than in the heat core. For the Pacific Northwest and the Northern Rockies, the situation is complicated by wildfire smoke and the fire weather concerns that come with it. The ridge over the Four Corners has its effects on the west as well, and the WPC noted that monsoonal moisture streaming north under the ridge is producing scattered convection in the southwest and high plains. But for Portland, Seattle, and the broader Pacific Northwest, the weather pattern shows a trough developing that will bring cooler and wetter conditions through the remainder of August, a contrast to the heat events that hit the west earlier in the summer. So the geographic picture for the next 10 days is this: South-central United States, Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, Arkansas, Louisiana. Inside the heat core, rapid onset drought active, Omega block locking the heat in place through at least August 28th. Southeast, some marginal easing late this week per the WPC, but not a full break. Southwest and the Four Corners, the ridge expanding northward into the Intermountain West, heat building through the weekend. Midwest transition zone, heat through the weekend, marginal improvement possible early next week, uncertain sustainability of any relief. Northern tier, active storm pattern, cold fronts and rain, a different summer than the one happening to the south. Here is what I need you to understand about the timeline going forward. The CPC hazards discussion for the day 8 through 14 period, which takes us through September 1st, carries the Omega block signal and describes the potential for little respite to the predominant ridging. That does not mean September will be as extreme as August. It means the transition out of this pattern is delayed and may be gradual rather than sudden. The body of CPC guidance through early September does not show a clean pattern break in the south-central tier. It shows a slow and uncertain evolution that keeps the region in above normal temperature territory well into the month. What would change that picture? Two things. Either the western trough deepens significantly and begins to disrupt the Omega block from the Pacific side, which would allow the ridge to erode and eventually let frontal systems penetrate the south-central United States with genuine cooling, or the El Niño-driven wave forcing in the upper atmosphere shifts phase, which can happen on a bi-weekly cycle as the Madden-Julian oscillation moves through its phases, and temporarily reduces the amplification of the subtropical ridge. Either of those scenarios could bring meaningful relief sooner than the current guidance is indicating. I will be watching both signals carefully in every model run. Tomorrow morning, the fresh GFS and European ensemble runs are the first priority. I will be pulling those the moment they process and looking at three specific things. First, the 500 millibar height value over the four corners at the day 5 and day 7 lead times. Any downward trend from 597 decameters signals the start of ridge erosion. Second, the western trough position and whether it shows any tendency to deepen toward the four corners region, which would be the first signal of omega block breakdown. Third, the tropical Pacific sea surface temperature trend and what the latest ENSO model runs are showing for the Nino 3.4 index over the next 4 to 6 weeks. I will have all of that analysis in tomorrow's video as soon as those model runs are available. If you want that update the moment it goes live, turn on notifications for this channel. That is the only way to make sure you do not miss it in the middle of a weather event that requires daily monitoring. Stay safe. Keep the air conditioning running. If you are in the south-central United States or the southeast coast right now, treat this heat the way you would treat a slow-moving hurricane, with full preparation, with water supply secured, with cooling backup in case of power outages, and with awareness of everyone in your household or community who might be vulnerable. Heat kills more Americans than any other weather event in most years. This summer is making that statistic visible in a way it rarely is. If this video gave you the depth of analysis you were looking for, not just what the temperature is, but why, not just this week, but the larger pattern, leave a like. It tells me to keep going at this level. Leave your city and your overnight low from this morning in the comments below. I read every one. I will see you tomorrow with the fresh model data.